pocket, Kirill Kaprizov, Frank Cervalli, I believe it's of Daily Faceoff now, had
Correct.
reported at the time that Kirill Kaprizov basically was in agreement on a 1-year, 8-figure deal with CSKA Moscow of the KHL. And then, of course, he said, unless the Wild comes along and gives him an offer he wants, in which case he will play for Bill Guerin's team in 2021-22. John Shipley of the Pioneer Press weighed in a column yesterday. Chip Scoggins, our friend, who, by the way, is going to join us, sitting in for Phil on Mackey and Judd on Friday, weighed in the Star Tribune today in a column. Chip's point was, this is a negotiating ploy. Don't be fooled. Yes, it's a mess, but Kirill Kaprizov is not going to Russia. I sense at this point in time that Chip's probably right. But here's the thing that's sort of weird about this. At what point in time does this finally end? Because, for instance, Fiala, okay? He has an arbitration date. And either his contract gets done before that, or he goes to the arbitration hearing and he picks, I believe it's the player's choice in the National Hockey League, a 1 or 2 year deal, and then the contract is done. So there might be acrimony between the two sides, Dex, but nonetheless, there will be a deal done. So it's like it's going to get done. And once it's done, he will play for the Wild. And it might not be settled long term at that point, but for this season, it will be. The Kaprizov thing to me is the interesting dynamic here. One is, I think Chip's right. I don't think he's going home. I just don't. And if he does, if he really wanted to go home, which I speculated on because we know nothing about the kid after when this all started, after the playoffs came to an end, I felt that he would have done it by now. Like if he was just like, I don't like being in the States. I want to be with my family, blah, 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 that he would have negotiated a deal fairly quickly to go home and stay there. That's not happening. So I think Chipper's right. I think it is a negotiating ploy. But that being said, the agent who, again, represented Artemi Panarin, and Panarin's situation was similar but not exact, is pulling the strings here. And so the one thing that I have no idea is, while I don't think he's going to play in the KHL, I also don't know exactly when he's going to sign here. Because, I mean, he could extend this out. Like, this is not he has the ability to basically start training camp not practicing. He has the ability, as far as I know, unless there's some rule I don't know about, and I don't think there is, to start the season not playing until he gets exactly what he wants. And if that's a 3-year contract, Bill Guerin is going to be very hesitant to do that. So I guess the one door that I would leave open in this that we really have not explored yet isn't that the threat of going back to Moscow is nearly as credible as the threat of him sitting out for a prolonged period to force the Wild's hand might be.
Here's where I'm at. I think it's highly unlikely he sits out. I think he's going to be here at training camp in less than a month. What is it? Coming up here already.
Yeah.
I think he'll be at training camp. I think this is mostly becoming a ploy by the agent. There was the weird Russian article, and of course, when you do the Google translation, it's never perfect English, so you kind of got to take that with a grain of salt, saying it was basically the biggest fraudulent report there is, that he's really not going back to Moscow. I think the bigger issue I have from Kirill's side, and we have I have a Fiala talker as well, but I think the problem with the Kirill side is it just makes him look bad. Like it makes things look a little ugly, and I get that he was a superstar and he was as advertised and he deserves to be paid, but I think it just makes him look bad to Bill Guerin, and Guerin's a no BSer. Like Guerin knows he's going to pay this guy, he knows that, but the fact his agent drawed this out, and I'm sure Guerin's frustration is definitely more on the agent than it is Kirill, but it does give Kirill a little bit of a bad look to management. Remember, this happened with Fiala 2 years ago when he signed his last bridge deal, that it went on. He's late to training camp because then there's another visa issue. He gets off to that slow start, and it wasn't until January before the pandemic when he basically became the game breaker that Paul Fenton dubbed him to be, and it took him a while to get in that fold. Now, I think Kirill is talented enough that won't happen to him necessarily, but these external factors however you want to take them, I think are going to start percolating if things don't get resolved here very shortly.
Yeah, well, and plus to add to your point, which is right, it is the fact that it took Kirill 5 years to get here. Like this would not be a problem if Kirill had come here quicker and played and accelerated his contract. He chose not to. Here's the one thing that you never know, Dex, when you're dealing, especially I think, with Russian players, though. Who back in the homeland is pulling the strings as well? Like there's a lot more. I agree with you. Kirill Kaprizov right now looks like, as far as a player off the ice, so I'm talking contractually and stuff like that, like a pain in the ass, right? Like he just does. It takes 5 years. Fletcher tried, drafted him and couldn't get him here. Paul Fenton tried for a year. Finally, Bill does, and Bill is hailed as a hero, and that's great. He got him, and he's outstanding. And then after 1 year with no ability to go to arbitration, no ability to sign an offer sheet elsewhere, he's doing this, or the agent is. But I always wonder, and especially because it's the same guy that represented Panarin, is who's in the background at home possibly pulling strings as well that go, because I don't think the players are necessarily in a position, especially at an age of, let's say 24 or 25, like Kirill is. I don't know that they're in a spot to put their foot down and be like, okay, let's stop this right now. I think there's a lot of people and things pulling at them, and I don't think we necessarily understand that because it's not in our sort of culture. Like we just got a lot of folks here who want to get paid. Hey, I'm really good at what I do, and if I can buy mom and dad a house, awesome, right? But I think when you're talking about Russia, you're also talking about circumstances that we don't necessarily get. And so I'm with you completely in that Kaprizov, by the day, looks more like a pain. But I also have a little bit of empathy for him, I guess, because I wonder what's going on behind the scenes as far as, because clearly, as big of fraud as this offer from CSKA Moscow might be, clearly there's something at work here of why they're doing it, because they know it looks like a fraud. Like they're not dumb. They just don't care. And so that crosses this whole conversation to a level that I think we don't necessarily get. And like, we're like, well, just sign. Like, dude, in 3, you know what? If you can get a 4-year deal in 4 years, go bolt and go play for the Kings or the Rangers or whomever. But I think there's a lot more at work here sometimes with these young Russian players than we know. And that's what sort of concerns me here, as far as assuming, like, I'm willing to assume that this is a bluff move about going home to play. But I'm not willing to dismiss the entire thing and just be like, it's all BS. I think you're probably right. But you always got to think there's something around the corner, and it's worse if you don't necessarily understand the dynamic of what that might be, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. I get that. I just, as we talked about on was it statements, I believe on Monday, this was supposed to be a fun off season. It's gotten a little stale since the Parise Suter buyouts. There's still stuff that can happen. I believe was it this morning or late last night, Sam Reinhart, signed his deal in Florida, I believe 3 years, 6.5 AAV. If I'm Fiala's camp, I think that's now going to be the best deal you can get. Is it the fairest deal and the deal that you deserve, Kevin? Maybe not. Maybe you do deserve a little bit more money and more term. But I think 3 and 6.5, considering that's what Sam Reinhart got, and I know Reinhart's a center, but I think that's probably the contract that Fiala is going to also get. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that's kind of the contract that Fiala ends up agreeing upon before that arbiter meeting, which I believe is now 5 days away, before he can pick that. I think eventually this contract's going to get done with Kevin, and they're not going to also give him a 4 or 5 year deal. I would like him to be here 4 or 5 years. I'd like to say I'm the biggest Kevin Fiala fan there is, but I think 3 years, 6.5, or 6 to 6.5, I should say, is probably going to be the term that Kevin Fiala ends up getting.
That seems fair. And the weird thing with him is, because we both think he's incredibly talented, and I think the team does too. But the weird thing with him is they don't seem to like him as much as we do. No. And so I don't think they value. I think you especially, but me too. I think we think of Fiala in a certain way about what he probably deserves in terms of length of the contract and financially. I don't know that they're on board with that. And so that's one where I don't think Bill Guerin especially necessarily agrees with us. On Kaprizov, Dex, so to get to the heart of today's show, which of course is always reckless speculation.
Mm-hmm.
I got a question for you. In fact, play the sounder. Play the reckless
sounder.
speculation sounder, please.
You got it. Reckless speculation.
So again, we're talking about a player that we really don't know much about. We're talking about a situation that we definitely don't understand in full. So here's my query to you: if Kirill Kaprizov gets a 3 or 4 year contract, but let's just say he wins. Let's just say Bill Guerin's like, I gotta have you back. He's like, I'm not coming back unless it's 3 years, maybe 4, but I ain't doing 5 or 6, and I certainly am not doing 7 or 8. At what point in time do you think their hand, and I'm not saying it's in the course of next season, okay? So just to be very clear, at what point in time do you think that their hand might be forced to have to trade him? Because, if it's 3 years, 3 years is going to get here quick. And you are salary cap strapped really, really badly in his years 2 and 3. So unfortunately, as distasteful as this question is, and I hate this idea, but at what point in time do you think you have to examine saying, it looks like this guy is going to walk, and we cannot, Marian Gaborik walked, X. He walked away from here, and that you got nothing for him. That can't happen again.
And this is on Fiala, right? This is on Kaprizov.
No, yeah, Fiala I'm not as concerned about, but the Kaprizov thing, because of all the dynamics behind the scenes, I'm just saying if it's very clear that he wants to play for the Rangers, I don't think you can go the Riseborough Gaborik route again and be like, okay, cool, then just leave after you're done here and get nothing for him.
I don't think personally, Jed, I just don't see a situation within the next 365 days, so basically the next year, where we have to start having that conversation. Let's say the Wild don't make the playoffs this year. Let's just say the Wild kind of fall flat. They're stagnant. They're just not in the top 8. They didn't hit the ceiling that we expected them to do so. I don't see a situation where that kicks in the next year. It depends also on the development of, obviously, Boldy and Rossi and where Kevin Fiala's at, where your goaltending's at. Basically, I think that the whole team would have to be catastrophically bad over this season for us to start having that conversation. I personally think that Kaprizov combo, if you want to start talking about it, would be like 18 months to 2 years from now.
Yeah. Well, that's my point. You're not going to trade him. I'm talking about the internal discussions about the future. So he is going to be, in my opinion, he is going to be back with this team unless he just flat out holds out this season. Okay. No, my point is, after that, the next 2 years, you are up against the cap big time. The buyouts start to kill you. And so at that point in time, if you have to strip things down a bit, and then Kirill's like, okay, I signed a 3-year contract, and after 3 years, I'm bolting. I'm saying at some point then in year 2, or more likely that 3rd year, you have to consider a trade. And you have to be prepared for that, because the one thing that will set this franchise back again is if you are stubborn and like, we can re-sign him and he walks. So that's where this entire thing gets walked up to a very dangerous and interesting point. Because certainly you could make a substantial trade there, and it better to get something back that you like than nothing.
Right. And I know this is more, reckless speculation.
Reckless speculation.
But I think thinking about the nuclear option, which in my opinion, that's the nuclear option, right? I mean, that's nuclear. I'm totally okay, obviously, having the conversation. I think the misconception of this show and of what we do at SKOR North is why you're even talking about something that can't happen, or why you talk something that is a very small % chance of happening. Well, number one, you're allowed to talk about those things. So they're not off limits. Topics aren't off limits. But I will say, spending a lot of time or energy on that nuclear option at this date, I think is a little premature. But I understand that if this team absolutely does not live up to expectations, those salary cap hits start to pile up. You have to then start having that conversation. Yes. That thought process of, well, if we have $15 million basically in dead money for the next 3 years, then there's no point for us to try to be competitive if we're not hitting the ceiling we need to do.
Oh, and to be clear though, so fans don't like to hear, I shouldn't say this. That's not fair. Some fans, because some fans very much enjoy us. Some fans don't like to hear about the pitfalls that might befell their team, whether that be the Twins, the Vikings, the Wild, the Wolves, the Gophers, the Lynx, whatever. Let me assure you of this. Bill Guerin and the Wild have had every type of conversation about Kaprizov that you could possibly have, and they actually have plans. So, like, you have to be prepared for everything. And what happens when you're not really prepared? Marian Gaborik walks away.
Yep.
See, so like that's the problem. This show is actually built on, in my opinion, is actually built on the fundamentals in some ways of what teams have to do, which is they have to have plans. Because let's just say, to wrap up here, I'm just going to take you through a scenario. Never would happen, Declan. I don't think it would ever happen, but let's just talk about it.
All right.
Draft night, you trade back to 23 and you nab Christian Darrisaw, your future left tackle, and he's going to be your guy, and you're going to plug him in, and you think to yourself, you know what? And then in the third round, you take Wyatt Davis, and you think to yourself, we're going to plug these guys in opening day, and all those people that said Kirk's contract is a problem are going to be proven wrong. We are in great shape. And then Wyatt Davis shows up to camp. He's out of shape. Head coach ain't happy. Okay, but he's a third round pick. We can do something there. Still got Darrisaw. Then Darrisaw shows up to camp, and he's actually behind physically where he was in minicamp. And now Rashad Hill is at left tackle. That's what happens when you don't think about worst case. Because Christian Darrisaw was coming off core muscle surgery. And it's not my job to have been concerned about that on draft night. It's my job now to look back at that and say, you're stuck with Rashad Hill. Is this really the best idea? Could you have thought about, let's say, your guy, Declan Goff, Brian O'Neill, going from right to left tackle, which is plausible. We talked about it. It's very possible.
Mm-hmm.
So as much as people do not like what we term, because it's a fun term, reckless speculation, I'm going to tell you right now, nobody recklessly speculates, and it's the right thing to do more than the teams do.
Absolutely.
And that's
they have those conversations.
And that's the God's truth. And look, some of it's fun, some of it's not fun, but it's when you go worst case, it's based in the reality of what's going to possibly get you to a championship if things come apart.
Yep.
It's that simple.
And Gerson Rosas has these conversations. He's admitted to us on his show before. So this absolutely happens. You know, Bill Guerin's come on this program and talked about similar things as well. You absolutely, teams talk about this more than you think so. It's not just hunky-dory and everything's rainbows and butterflies over at, X team headquarters. It's a maddening experience. That's why it's fun for us to be armchair GMs, because we get to have the fun part of the conversations, not the mental gymnastics of how we're going to make this work financially, from a chemistry standpoint, from all these other different external factors. It's easy for us to sit here and speculate on those trades. Just like, if all these San Jose Sharks players are saying, I'm not playing if Evander Kane's still on this team, well, then Thomas Hertl, come on down if that's the case. But that is a conversation for a completely different podcast and day on Mackey and Judd or Judd's Hockey Show.
Outstanding stuff. It has been a fun Reckless Speculation Thursday. Thanks to Dukes for the scoop, including breaking news in a scoop about Christian Darrisaw having seen a core muscle specialist in Philadelphia on Thursday. Chip Scoggins will be in for Mackey tomorrow. Conduits of Trouble meets the Mackey and Judd Show. I'm Judd. He's Declan. Talk to you later.